Hello and welcome to today's session. I'm going to walk you through some basic concepts around connecting some of the data tools in Visual Studio to your database. We'll build a simple database inside of Visual Studio. We'll add a table to it, and then we should be able to connect some of the data tools controls to that database table, bring back some data, and display it on the screen using a grid view control. So let's get started. I'm going to go in and create a new web project. So File, New Project. And we're selecting Web, ASP.NET Web Applications. Let's call it GridView. You might call this Lab 16 if you choose to. GridView Intro, I'm going to call this project. You're going to find this very useful for your final project. Your individual project and your group project as well. In most cases, you're going to have scenarios where you're displaying data from a database table, maybe a list of data values. So let's go ahead and get started. Hit OK. Empty web forms. You know the drill. Now we have a nice project. I'm going to go ahead and add a new web form. So add web form in here. Let's call this product list. A list of products will be in here. Alright, so now that that's created, I'm going to switch over to the design view, and I want to display a list of products. So I'm going to take a look at a couple of data tools. So to do this, we might need to use, I'm going to introduce you to a grid view control, but there are lots and lots of different data-driven dynamic tools here. We can add a chart control that would give us some chart capabilities, pointing to some data source, maybe a database table, choose the different types, maybe it's a bubble chart, you know, any type of chart you could think of, right? Bar chart, so on and so forth. I'm not going to show you an example of this because if you have that scenario, you can use it. But these would be under the data category. For the sake of what we need to do for today, we'll use a grid view control. So I'm going to drag and drop a grid view control onto my canvas. Now the data could be coming from different sources. So link data source is an example, an entity data source, object data source, a sitemap data source, SQL data source, XML data source. The data source that makes the most sense for our scenario is a SQL data source. I'm going to drag and drop that guy to the canvas, right? So I'm going to be connecting this grid view control, which is basically a table that would show a bunch of columns and some data values inside of it. Once I actually build the database table, this is going to be the visual interface where you could see it. Now this is going to need to connect to the database, and it's going to be connecting to the database by virtue of the SQL data source, right? So step one, we added a grid view. Step two, we added a SQL data source. That's all we need to really focus on for now, right? There's a bunch of different options you can play with and get used to. All right, let's go ahead, and now we're going to add a database inside of Visual Studio, which is really amazing. So I'm going to right click this, click add. We're going to go to add new item. This time we're going to click on the data category, and we're looking for SQL Server database because that's the database type we're going to be using for this in this project. So I'm going to call this my product catalog. You can name your database whatever. SQL Server database files usually have an extension MDF. Do not change this, right? MDF is the file extension for a SQL Server database file. In the real world, a database file would live on a different server from where the web server is going to live. If you remember all the concept that we talked about in how we go about putting together an architecture, we said the best practice for a web application is to have a web browser talk to a web server, and a web server talks to a database server. We're going to break that paradigm for this example and in this class because we're building things locally and we don't have access to servers. So in this case, we're going to keep the database in the same server or machine as we would have our web server. Now, if we do that, ASP.NET has a security feature, right? To prevent users from being able to browse to your database, pick up your entire database, download it with all the information that's in there and walk away. That would be really bad. So the security feature is they have an app underscore data folder, right, that would be created, and your database file would live under that. That folder is not browsable. It's a system folder that's not browsable by a web browser. A web browser can't get to it, right, for whatever security reasons. We don't want people to be able to download the database file. So you want to say yes to this prompt. What that does is it creates this app underscore data folder, right? And if you remember, your database usually has a cylinder icon. So this is my database. There's a log file that goes along with it. Don't worry too much about that. But that's my database file, product catalog, living under the app underscore data folder. And I have my product list page here. Now I want to update this database, add a table to it. So I just double clicked on it and it opened up my Server Explorer, which typically opens on the left hand side. If you can't see it, you can go under View and look for that, right? Server Explorer is right here. So you'll be able to see that and add it so you can access it. Now if you look at this, let me minimize this. I have a bunch of different database objects, right? If I expand tables, there's nothing on the tables. That's because it's a fresh database. There's nothing in here, but a whole bunch of things, objects that you can create in a database. We're only going to be interested in tables for the sake of this class. So to create one, I'm going to right click on this tables folder and select add new table. Pretty simple. So that's going to load a little canvas area where I can kind of design my database table and kind of minimize some of these things here to make it a little bit more legible. Let's pull this guy down. Alright, so my canvas is loading. Once it loads, I'll be able to make some changes to the interface. Sometimes it's a little bit slower than I would expect it to be. Alright, so by the magic of video, I now have this loaded. And the first thing I want to do is build a table that has a structure. I've kind of created a nice structure of what I want this to look like. So I'm going to have a table called product. It would have these columns, product ID, photo URL. I'm showing you some extreme examples of how to bring in an image, right, and display it in the grid view. How to add a decimal or double type. If we're using a title of a product, that might be variable characters. How to add a date time data type. Ideally, we'll add a foreign key. We'll deal with that next week. But this time I'll just add posted by. And how to add a bit or Boolean data type. That gives you kind of an array of options. If you need to play around with this down the road, you've got a very good example. And then I've got some sample data that I'll be entering in so we don't waste time looking for things. But I'll show you the basics. All right, so let's go ahead and first name the table product. Right, so the name of the table is product. Notice that cannot happen anywhere here. This is the place where you would name the table. So this is a data definition SQL language. Create table, DBO is who owns it, database owner by default, and we need to change the value in the square brackets. This is going to be changed to product, right? This is the only time we're actually going to write some code is when we need to name the table. So create table, DBO, table name is product. If you forget this step, you might have to redo this or rename the database table. It's very important to do this first. Name the table here. Then we're going to go in and add the columns in this section, right? Some people get very confused about this interface, so please pay close attention. I'm going to call this product ID, and that's my primary key. Notice I have a key right next to that. And usually primary keys do not allow null values, right? So not null is not selected. Now I'm going to add my title, product title column, and I need to set the data type. N-char means there's going to be only 10 characters. N is for allows me to store 2-byte characters. So if I have any um, non-standard characters, such as if I anticipate that people are going to be using my website and they're going to have foreign languages that might have, some different special characters. Those special characters usually would be stored with 2 bytes. So um, we would choose nvarchar in most cases. Char means it's fixed width. I want it to be variable width, right? So I can set nvarchar, which means I'm now going to support international characters. It's also going to be variable characters, and the character limit, I'm saying the limit is 50, so you can only have a title to a limit of 50. I'm going to change that number now to 250. That means I can store a title of a product that is supports international characters, is variable length, right? And is 250 maximum size, right? So you get to select the right data type. That's very important. All right, what else do I have? I have photo URL. So let's go ahead and do that. Photo URL of the product. That I'm going to make nvarchar max. Max is about 4,000. So I want to support very long URLs, right? Back in the day, this was very important to kind of limit the size of your database. These days, space is not a big deal. The price of the product, that I'm going to make decimal, because I might use it for calculations down the road. Notice by default, it adds decimal 18, 0 floating point numbers. I'm going to change this to 2, because this is going to be up to 2 decimal places. So 18 leading, 2 floating point numbers, up to 2, and we'll round it up when need be. Right, so that's very important, 18 2, if you're using floating point numbers. I think I also have who posted it, the date it was posted, and is it for sale. So let's go with date added. And that is going to be a date time data type. It can be date time 2, which has a stronger position. I'm going to stay with this for now. Right? It's just a date. I only care about the actual date, not the time necessarily. Posted by who posted it. Ideally, this would be a foreign key. I don't want to deal with foreign keys in this example, so I'm going to make this on nvarchar 50. Okay, 50 characters for the name of the person who posted it. And is this for sale, yes or no? Is for sale. I want this to be a Boolean data type, so it's either yes or no, true or false. So we'll use bit. Bit is the right equivalent of Boolean on the SQL Server side of it. So data types, this gives you some introduction to data types. Now the last step, very, very critical to pause here and make sure you get this. I'm going to select the primary key, and I want SQL Server to auto-increment this value, right? Every time a new record is added, I want it to set the primary key value so I don't have to write code to do this. That's why I recommend your primary key should always be on integer. That way you can set that value or that setting and not have to deal with figuring out what was the previous value and can I generate a new one. That's unnecessary code. So to do this, we can right click on this guy, click on properties, or simply open up your properties window when you have this selected, this row, your primary key selected. So I'm going to pin this guy. And the most important thing to do, let me hide this so it's in the forefront, is we need to select identity specification, expand this guy. And its identity, right, we're going to double click or select the drop down, change it to true. That's going to make this an auto increment value. And you'd see as we made all these changes, the SQL DDL gets written down here. Right? So if we knew how to write DDL, we don't have to use this interface. We can just simply write some code here, right, to create the table. So I made this identity true. By default, it would seed at 1, meaning the first row that gets added would be 1, and it would increment by 1. So the next record that gets added would be 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. You can change this increment if you needed to, and you can change the seed if you wanted to. But this is good enough for what we need. So pay attention here. We're not going to click Save to actually create this database. You really want to pay attention to this Update button. This is how you create the table. Most students will click on Save. That's not going to save the table. There's no such thing as saving the table to the database, right? In this case, we need to update the database with this table. So I'm going to click on Update. See a screenshot, and it looks like this. Click on Update Database, right? Since we're trying to update the database here. And what should happen is you should see down here some progress. So you need to wait till this goes green, meaning that it's complete. Sometimes it'll take a while for the database table to get created. So I see this in green. That means this is all done. I'm going to close out of this window because this is a very complicated window. I don't want to deal with it right now. I'm done creating this table. Get out of my way so I can get some other work done, right? Let's unpin this guy. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, I can't see the table. I just created the table under this guy. I can't see it. Typical question lots of students would ask. Unfortunately, Visual Studio isn't smart enough to auto-refresh. Maybe it is, but it doesn't. It doesn't auto-refresh, so you have to manually refresh this. This is the universal icon for refresh button, right? So you refresh that, you'd see your product table. If it doesn't say product on here, that means you did not complete the first step. You want to go back and recreate that table. Now that you've created that table, we can actually add some data to the table. So you select that table. In fact, we can expand this to see all the columns. These are all the columns that we added. Really cool. Right-click the product table, and we can either create a new query, we can come back and create triggers. We'll learn about how to write some SQL in new query window next week. For now, what we need to do is to click on Show Table Data. You could also go to Open Table Definition to look at what you defined the columns to be previously. Right? It will show you the screen that we were on previously. All we need to do here is click on Show Table Data. And that would give us a nice screen with some plain area where we could type in some stuff. So I've got some sample data to plug in so we can shorten this video. So I'm going to click this, add red mango. Notice as I move on, I get this little icon, cell changes have not been saved. None of these values will be saved till I move to the next row, right? Then that would go away. But for now, I've got some additional values to add. So let me add this guy. This is a URL that I found online. Since we're not going to publish this app, this is completely okay. Otherwise, you really want to pay attention to copyright rules if you're planning on publishing this app. Create your own images if you can. Date added, let's say this was added 1/1/2018. Notice it adds the time, and I can strip out the time when I display it. That's fine. This is from John Doe. Is it on sale? Yes, it's for sale. So I put in 1. 1 gets transformed into true. 1 is true, 0 is false, right? And once I move to the next line, you see those red exclamations go away, right? So let's say I'm looking for a triple berry smoothie now. So this app is actually going to be selling smoothies. And notice this actually created product ID 1. I didn't actually enter anything into the product ID column. That's because this is an identity column. So it's going to manage the product IDs for me. Right, so if we wanted to find some additional URLs, let me show you how to go do that. So you go to Google, search for smoothie. In my case, right, yours might be something completely different. Switch on to the Images tab. Click on Tools, and you want to look at usage rights. So you can filter the results so you're only looking at images that you have the right to use for commercial use or for non-commercial use. Another key interesting concept, I typically prefer to pick images with a transparent background, right? That way you can have this on a blue background, green background, whatever it is. I strongly urge you to consider that. So select transparent, pick the right usage rights, so you're not you're using images that you can use legally, so on and so forth. So you can see once you see this checker box, that means this has a transparent background there. If you wanted to get the URL of this image, you can right-click on that, copy image address. If you're in Chrome, this is what it looks like. If you're in a different browser, you can figure it out. So copy image address will give you the URL for that, right? And then you can come in. I have a couple that I've entered here, so I'm going to use those for my example. So I'm going to plug this in. 15.99. Let's go to 17.99 for the triple berry. Triple berry is fairly expensive. 2/1/2018 when this was added. Employee James Smith did this. This is more expensive, so it's not for sale. I'm going to enter 0. Move on to the next row, and you see those exclamations go away. So I'm going to pause the video and add some sample data, and I'll come back just to keep this video short. All right, so through the magic of video, I've entered in 5 different products, so we're good to go. Right, I'm going to close out of this interface because I just created some product data. I have 5 sample data values. I don't have to save these. So as you enter the values, this gets saved automatically. You don't have to click Save to save this. This is already saved, so I can close out of this window. I'm going to save this web page, however. So the next thing I need to do now is get this web page to connect to this database table with some sample data in it, so I can view it on the screen. So I need to configure the SQL data source. So to configure that, you select that. You should see a little icon right next to this. Click that little arrow. You should see an option for configure data source. I'm going to click on that. Then I'm going to pick my database file that I just created, productcatalog.mbf. Click on connection string. This is what actually connects your web page to the database. It connects through what's called a connection string, right? This is very, very important. We don't want to mess with this. Typically, it will be stored in the web.config file. I'm simply going to move around and move to next. Once you get comfortable with connection strings, you can modify them, you can play around with them, point this to a different server where your database is hosted, all that good stuff. I'm going to leave this selected, hit next, no changes there. Notice this guy is then able to pick up all the tables in my database. So far I only have one table, the product table. Here are all the columns. It's attempting to write some SQL for me. Select star from product. You probably know by now. That means retrieve all columns from the product table. I can plug in a where clause to filter. I can do an order by, do some advanced things. I can even select this and hit next to go write my own SQL statement. I'm comfortable at this point with select star from product, so I'm going to hit next. I can test my query. Select star from product. Show me what the results of this would look like, right? So that brings back all this nice, cool data that I entered. So I know my connection is working correctly. I'm going to click Finish. And the connection to the database is held in the SQL data source. Now I want this grid view to be able to see that, right? Connect this to that so I can see the data that's in the SQL data source, or at least the connection that's in the SQL data source. So I'm going to click the arrow once grid view selected, choose data source. I'm going to choose this guy, and you can see it's got a template of what this would look like. So the grid view is now configured to point to the SQL data source. I can enable paging. That way, if I had more than 10 or so products, it would move to the next page. I don't have to write code to do that. I can enable sorting. So if you click on a given column header, it would sort by that, so on and so forth. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and test this out. So it looks like I've got some sample data. I'm going to save this, Control S to save, and go run this in the browser and see if this is actually working the way I expect it to. So this sometimes might take a little while to compile, but hopefully this comes up fairly quickly. I don't think I've warmed up my Visual Studio yet, so this might take maybe a little bit longer. But you see I've got some data coming back, and this is the data that I had in the database table. It's pretty cool. I didn't have to write any C# code to make this happen, right? This is all pure configuration. Can you do it with C#? Yes, and we'll be dealing with that next week. You'll learn how to do some of these things using C# code behind. But we can use the ASP.NET data tools to do a lot of things. Right, so this is coming back. I still can't see my images. They're just coming back as URLs. That doesn't really help me. And I don't quite like the format of this screen. I wanted to have maybe some alternating colors. So if I knew CSS, I could change the style of this. Otherwise, I could go to auto format and pick one of the formats. My personal favorite is classic. So I'm going to choose classic, hit OK. The classic would look something like this. Let's go back and test it. Kind of has an alternating background color, maybe light blue, white, that type of thing. This is starting to take shape. I like it. You know, I can change the font, style, format, and things like that. See if we can maybe change this a little bit. Make it look cool. Fine. Okay. So that's I can style this however way I like to, right? All right. Now we can go in and add in edit columns. Right? I'm going to show you how to edit some simple columns in here. So here are all the columns, dynamic columns that I have. Sometimes I might not show product ID, but I'm going to show product ID in this case just so we can see it. This is the header text property of this field. So if I want the header, right, the header is what shows on in the table header. Right now it says product ID. I want a space between product and ID. This is where I'm going to do that. Right? I can set the header text. There's a whole bunch of properties in here and how it's sorted, all that stuff. So this is good enough for what I need to do for this column. So I'm going to move on to the title field. That looks like it's cool. The photo field was just showing the photo URL, right? And that's not really what I want. So I'm going to delete that. So I'm going to select photo URL, hit this red X button. That gets rid of it. And I'm going to add a different control. But before I do that, I'm going to go show you how to configure the price. So it shows the $ in front of it. The previous screen that we looked at didn't have the price with the $ in front of it. So I'm going to go down here and I'm looking for the data properties. This is the data field price. This is the column in the database table that this is mapped to. So I don't want to mess with this. But I do want to change the format. I want to show the $ in front of it. Right? So I could do one of two things. I could maybe do use this format, 0 column C. 0 is basically this column value, right, is going to be in this position 0, index position 0. So price will be plugged in here using the format C, which is for currency, right? So that's good enough for what I needed to do. For the date added, I want to put a space in the header. So I want this to say date added, right? I'm not doing it to the data field. I'm doing it to the header text. And the format for date added from this column, when it displays, I want it to be 0 colon. I'm going to do uppercase D, which would be long date. This is kind of suggesting what some of these values could be. You can look them up online, but the right format should be. It's kind of in your slides from the past, C, D, percentage, P, and so on and so forth. Uppercase D would be long dates, lowercase d, short date, that type of thing. But this is the format that you want to put it in, because we can't do two-string D or two-string C. It would be kind of in this format instead, right? So 0, colon, then whatever your preferred option was going to be. So I want this to be in that format, long date. Posted by, I'll just put a space in the header text. It's for sale. I'm just going to make it for sale. Space, something like that. So let's go take a look at this, and then we'll deal with the image later on, or shortly after. All right, so now I see $ in front of this, my price. I see product ID, I see title, I see date added, right? I see posted by. Notice it automatically, because this was bit, it put a checkbox next to this. And I have the ability to do a couple different things. I could even make this editable, so a user can come in and edit this really easily. So that's probably good enough. Let me show you how to sort. So I can sort by title. You see the C up top, right? Reverse sort, wellness up top. You see the whole row is sorted. I can sort by date, posted by. These are all the records posted by James Smith versus. I didn't have to write any code for that. The power of the grid view makes that happen, right? All right, so let's go add the image URL now, and then perhaps we'll have a complete solution. So I'm going to go back in here. Now I'm going back to edit columns. I'm going to add a new type of column. Now these are all the available types of columns. These are the selected columns, right? So I need to look for an image field. So I'm going to add, and you can add a hyperlink to all kinds of different bound field types, checkboxes, different controls that you want to show in here, right? I want the image field, so I want to show an actual image, not just a URL. So I'm going to click Add. That adds it here to the bottom. I can move it. Perhaps I want it to show right before the title. So I want to show product ID, then the image field, then the title, right? So I use these little buttons here to move this thing up. Now I'm going to configure this. So by now, this guy is configured, but it doesn't know where to get the URL from, right? So I need to tell it which column has the image URL. So I'm setting the data image URL field to the column called, here are the list of columns in the table called photo URL. So then this is mapped to that. So the data image URL field is now photo URL, right? So I would be able to see some type of image. I can add a header text called photo, product photo, something like that. Hit OK. Now when I return to this, you'd see this has photo, which is the header text. It's data bound. We don't actually have any sample data to plug in here till I run it. So let's save that, run this, and hopefully, if we're lucky, we might be looking at some images. All right, so now I've got a whole bunch of images, but see, they're really, really large. And this doesn't look the greatest, right? So the next thing I might need to do, but notice they're transparent, so it looks really nice on this alternating background. That's why you should consider using transparent background images. Right? It makes it look a lot nicer. Now what I might need to do is figure out a way to resize these so they actually fit, right, nicely. So we're going to go back in and configure this. So I'm going back in here to edit columns. Let's go to the photo image field. And what I'm going to do now is set the control style. I can either set the height or the width. I'm choosing to set the height. So I'm going to set the height to 100 pixels. That way each image, even though they can have different widths and heights, all the images will have the same height. But I'm going to make the width fluid. That way it can it can stretch out but keep the same height, right? So it'll be proportional. You don't typically want to set the height and width unless you're sure that all the images already have the same height and width. Now that's just a design concept. It's completely up to you. So I did that. I set the height in control style to 100 pixels for my example. Yours might be slightly different, right? Do whatever makes the most sense with you, play around with it, get something that works. And now look at this. This looks pretty beautiful. I've got my images lined up, titles. I can still sort by title, that works, all this good stuff. And this is about all that we need to know on how to build a very simple grid view, add some sorting capabilities to it, plug in images, and build a very nice website. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. Take care.